being born in '65, if in the early days somebody would come up to me and say, I'd like to come into the show, and they show me a card, and I look at the card and it would say, Sam Schwartz, rock critic. And I said, how can you be a rock critic? I mean, the baby's 3 months old or a year old. How can you be a rock sound engineer specialist? How can you be a lighting specialist mainly for rock? We're too young, all of us. And I've always felt that so much of what I do now and so much what I know now started right then, although I applied some experiences that I had in life before that. But if somebody would say, well, Bill, how much experience had you had in crowd control prior to that? How many years had you been doing it? That part of me was born then. And how did you know how much to charge? How did you know how to get an encore out of somebody? How did you know how to tell an act when they asked you what you thought of them? Well, where did that come from? Well, that was an opinion based on what? Did you see that many other acts? No. So what '65 was, it was the beginning across the board. I mean, the only thing that was going on before then, I was alive and I learned how to read and write and had some education, street and academic. But that world, that whole society, I was even more distant from that focus point than Marty Ballin or Phil Lesh or the musicians or the sound people or
well, how come you were the one to make it happen then? What is it? You say that people have asked you this in the past. You may have thought about yourself in the past, but how come you? Why were you the one that, as you say, picked up the ball and ran with it? What was it that you knew?
I wasn't the only one that tried to run with it.
No, but I agree. You're not the only one that tried, but you're the one. You're the major success. How come it worked for you?
I would have to answer you in such a way so as not to put anybody else down. Because
right, I'm not trying to put somebody down. I'm asking, what is it about you, Bill Graham, that allowed you to make it work this well?
There were 2 or 3 factors. I'll mention 2 or 3. One, I think that generally speaking, I was the one producer in that early era who was the most realistic about what it might take, that I couldn't leave that much up to the fates, that I couldn't and wouldn't accept a general laissez-faire attitude towards responsibilities, that if it's at 8 o'clock, that's when I open the doors and you should be there, and if it's at 4 o'clock sound check, you should be there, and if I need your picture to get to the paper, if you don't come to me, I'll get to you and get that picture. And some of the other producing factions, even though their philosophy and their outlook was very nice, it was very gentle, it was very non-competitive, was a nice way to look at business. But the fact that many of these other people did not look at it as a business, and which is a nice way to look at business. I don't want this to be a business. But if you have a candy store here and he's got a candy store there, are you going to tell me you don't care where they go? Then you can't pay your bills. We don't live in utopia. And I think the major problem in the early days was that other people who wanted to put on shows did not face reality. I'm not saying they should or shouldn't. If they didn't care if they'd succeed, that was their decision. I didn't want to fail. I didn't want to get dirty. I didn't want to get ugly. But when you charge someone for something, and someone else charges someone for something in the same field, you are competitors in a business venture. I've never thought I was, to this day, I mean, there's proof. I am not only not a good businessman, I'm not a businessman. There were other people who take care of business. In the early days, I just happened to be lucky that I made more than I spent. So there was some realism attached to what I was trying to do.
Let me ask you a question that speaks to some criticism of you.
Sure.
There's been criticism that the techniques you developed, as you say, it was new then and you scrambled, you ad-libbed how things were to work, and you made, in essence, the beginnings of modern rock and roll, 65 on, into a business rather than a utopian way of looking at life and bringing music to people. There are those who say that what you did changed rock and roll in the process, that it began the process of killing or ending the flower power days, whatever that means. What do you think about that, Bill?
Oh boy. What that should mean then is, Bill, if you hadn't done this, if you hadn't succeeded, we would still be able to go to groovy, freewheeling, far out, free concerts in the park. And that everything would just be mellow, that the Haight-Ashbury would line with trees, full of buds. All the shops would be full of psychedelic merchandise, and you can get sandals in 12E in green and 11B in brown. That Love Burgers would be selling on a continual basis, that everybody would be able to buy all the drugs that they wanted. And what a wonderful society. We live in the United States of America. And I am not saying that this other communal spirit was wrong and unhealthy. It couldn't work, because if you ask a band to come to your place and play, and you don't have enough money to pay them to go back to Oregon or Wichita, wherever they come from, you cannot give them vibes to get on TWA. You cannot give them a key of grass and say, hey man, dig it. You can't do that. Now, I'm not saying that they hid behind being hip by saying, we're not making it. And I'm not saying that they try to cheat anybody. I don't think they did. Other producers and promoters wanted to succeed without accepting the responsibility that you're a business. Many of the groups felt the same way. Hey man, you know, I didn't feel right about getting there at 9, so I'm here at 11. Well, you can't, because you agreed that when we told these people, give us $4 or $3 or $5, that you would be here at 8 o'clock. Why did you agree to this? Well, it's very easy if you come on the stage and say, hey man, you know, the square dude, he just doesn't understand, man, like I was with my lady and dig it. No, you can't do that. So in answer to your question of if you didn't become successful, Bill, it would still be here. In my opinion, and this may be a grandiose statement, it would have become extinct much, much earlier. And we did not make it the business that it is. The public does that.
But
you put out so much.
You made it possible for the public to do that. You organized the concerts and the tours that allowed the public to come buy the tickets and make it a business.
In 1971, the Fillmore's East and West were the most lucrative, I think in the history of entertainment. That might be me as making such a bland, grandstand statement. I doubt if any two buildings ever showed as much profit on a continual basis. In 1971, I closed these facilities simply because I no longer wanted to be involved in the madness of wheeling and dealing excuse me, every week with the demands of the public, with the demands of the artist, running these two facilities. If anybody could have continued and just sat in this gold mine, or if I were to dig out the file somewhere where about a year before I closed the Fillmore's, I could show you a document where a particular organization in New York City, an investment firm, offered me an 8-figure to franchise the Fillmore's, and I would be a Colonel Sanders or a Joe Louis and just cut these ribbons, and you know, the Fillmore Peoria and the Fillmore Cucamonga. Well, if I was this businessman, I certainly would have done that, or I would have taken the posters and some of the other paraphernalia, or the T-shirts, and made 20 times more than I ever did. I'm not saying I'm far from poor, but to capitalize on that era, if you were to judge me on the method of capitalization, I'm a dreadful failure.
Because you could have made a lot more than you did?
Ask an artist if I ever asked for an option, ever. That if an artist was new and said, Mr. Graham, I'll do anything to play your place. And I said, fine, we'll give you a shot. And that act today, over the years, has sold millions of records and demands hundreds of thousands of dollars for a performance. Right down the line. If I were that person, and this is, I'm not saying in defense of who I am, my God. More than that, I'm sitting here in defense of who they are. That
well, let me ask you a direct question then.
Sure.
You tell me, you say to me, I am not a businessman.
I don't function like a businessman.
Describe yourself to me. What is your image of yourself? You tell me who Bill Graham is. What do you do for a living?
Primarily, I'm involved in public assemblage and the guiding of the careers of what I consider to be very fine artists, like Carlos Santana and Montrose and some others. And I'm also involved in a most privileged area, too. I think the artist is the most privileged of all species. The artist can take his palette or his pen or his clay and go somewhere, make his statement and say, here it is, and this is what I have to say, and I'll be judged by that. The actor to some extent, but he needs other people. Now, I am not an artist. As I said years ago, I want to be an actor, but even an actor isn't the pure artist because he needs other people's words and other people to work off of. I consider myself to be the next most fortunate in that, not being an artist, I have the opportunity and grasp the opportunity less now than I did before. I'm not as fortunate anymore because the real power in our business now is the headliner who can dictate. If you want me, you got to take this other act, this sound, this light. But for a long period of time, and to some extent I still have some of that left, I can say I have the privilege of renting for a day this facility. I have decided to take these artists, put them on that stage, and through advertising and publicity or the desire on the parts of other humans, I will have these people come to the same meeting place, and at a given time these people will affect these people and these people will affect these people. Hopefully they will have had a good time, they will have had a good time, I will have had a good time, they spent some money, they also made some money, I made some money, nobody loses. That's a very rare privilege, and perhaps they will have learned something by a type of act that I put on that stage. Not just another rock and roll act. Maybe I put on Yusef Lateef with Jefferson Airplane, or King Curtis with Aretha Franklin, or the Tower of Power with Miles Davis. And somebody may have said, I never heard Miles Davis before. I really came to see the headliner, but I had to see this act before. So in the end, if somebody leaves there and say, hey man, that's not bad. I thought the only thing that existed was rock and roll. Or somebody said that the only thing that ever existed was grass, but wow, this is fresh air. Now, the producer, if you are a producer, you stand in the wing and you can ego trip pretty nicely.
On the experience that you created, you brought together.
You are not responsible for the performance. You are responsible for the chemical juxtapositions of moving things a certain way. What happens when a person comes to a facility? You take their ticket. What happens from that point on? Now, I'm not saying it's always groovy and it's always vibey, but I don't say, come to my gig where the environment is pleasant, where you have a nice stage setting, where I guarantee you the group will play 19 hours, where we will have a jam. No, it says Fleetwood Mac and the Jefferson Airplane or Santana or the Rolling Stones, and this is the price of the ticket, come. It's not right for me to walk on the stage and say, oh, if you only knew the trouble I had with the sound system. You think they just came out for the encore? Let me tell you how we got them out for the encore. You think B.B. King and Chuck Berry and Albert King and Paul Butterfield just walked out there? Let me tell you about the craziness I went through backstage. No. That's like you going to a restaurant and the maitre d' comes over and says, before I get you the steak, if you knew the service I had with the cow, that's what the ticket is all about. So I can't speak for them. I can only tell you that I know I'm fully cognizant of the privilege and power that a producer has. A producer can change your taste buds. I don't make the decision to change you. But if you come to a facility and you see, and you're a Grateful Dead fan, and before the Grateful Dead go on, Miles Davis is on the show, and you come in and say, oh God, this other act, Jesus. And all of a sudden you listen to that stage, and you hear Miles's trumpet, or you hear Mavis Staples singing gospel. Now you can't spell gospel, you don't know where it even comes from. And 1 out of 10,000 people goes to a record store the next day and buys Sketches of Spain, or buys a record by the Staple Singers, and has some understanding where some other stuff comes from. Do you know who I am? For me, I'm heavy duty.
Because you changed, because you taught somebody something? Is that
I didn't teach it to them. They went to that facility to see that, which they may never have seen if I wasn't mad enough or interested enough to put that on a stage. I didn't make Mavis Staples' chops. I didn't tell or teach Yusef Lateef how to play brass or read instruments. But They may never have come there to see the Grateful Dead and seen that if I didn't decide to put them together. Or they may never have experienced a day at Winterland where they could see a Last Waltz or a New Year's Eve show where all of a sudden 5 years later they'll see me in the street and say, Bill, remember that New Year's Eve where that horse, the black horse came out and the white guy in the diapers and the white horse with the black guy in the diapers and they had these flowers and we had this hourglass. I said, yeah, it was. He said, wow, Bill. God, no.
Wait, how does that make you feel when
Great.
That's it. That's that and the money or what you do it for.
The fact that you mentioned that and the money.
Well, because you can't ignore the money. The money's there.
But one of the hardest things to convince anybody of, which I don't try to convince anybody of, it was never just the money. Now, am I going to sit here and lie to you and say, oh, shucks, I live the same way I used to. Oh, shucks, I just have this little Jaguar. And shucks, I just have this little house on 12 acres. Or, gosh, no. Why not? If a man leaves a gig where he earns 26 grand a year and goes to a gig where he earns 120 a month, does he do that for the money? Is he crazy? Why does he do that? Because some people look at survival and say, at any cost, survival. And some other people say, God, when I grow up, I want to be a fireman. Then he becomes a fireman. He says, I'm not getting off. But God, that's what I wanted to be. I'm going to be a goddamn fireman for 20 years. Some other guy says, I want to be a fireman. And all of a sudden, he's climbing up the ladder. Jeez, I don't want to be a fireman anymore. He says, I think enough of myself to get off this ladder and try something else. I think I'll be a waiter or a taxi cab driver or a statistician. Well, I went through that era. And at the age of 35, I'd gone through office management and regional management and statistics and waiting on tables and driving taxis and running an office. And all of a sudden, in 1963, I said, the hell with it. I'm going to stay with what I enjoy doing, being involved in the theater. And 2 years later, they ran out of money. And we put on 4 or 5 benefits after the first one. I said, I like this. I have not only a capacity for doing it well, I enjoy it, which is not the same as running an office. I know how to run an office. I didn't want to come to the office every day wearing a suit and tie. You're late, Miss Smith. Who wants to do that? Somebody else? Fine. If he doesn't have the balls to get up and try something else, that's his hang-up. It wasn't my hang-up. I've got a different hang-up now that I'm still doing what I think I'm doing pretty well. And I'm trying to do other things, which is a whole subject in itself, which we'll do some other time. But to have been in San Francisco in 1965, to have been given a shot at doing what I do, how many people have an opportunity to make full use of something that is totally alien to academic training, that relies 95% on street sense and common sense, and that relies also on another aspect of your characteristics, which I tried to mention to you before, about the 3 things that let us do what we do. The fact that I'm somewhat realistic about what it's all about, that I think I possess a certain amount of tenacity. And the third one is the one that everyone misses, has missed for 10, 12 years. And when I mention it to you, you're going to say, well, that's a little bit vain or a little egocentric. I don't mean it that way. If this element of my nature didn't exist, I don't think I could sit here. And I just hope that you and the viewers can understand that through the years of beautiful madness of what we go through, we are in the most joyful, most insane, most pleasant, most disgusting, greatest, vilest business I know of. We buy and sell people and put them on stages in front of people for public consumption. And it's a great business. And it's a great love affair. At the same time, when the plane lands and they forgot an instrument and you have to cancel, when the guy doesn't feel the vibes and he doesn't want to leave his hotel room, when something goes crazy, you have one of 2 choices. You go crazy, or you relate to something that you hope you possess, and that's a sense of humor. If you don't have a sense of humor in the midst of all this madness, you can't survive. I'm not a funny person. I'm not a comedian. I don't think I do funny things. But I should like to think that in my relationship with the artists and with the people that I work with, if we, generally speaking, didn't laugh at ourselves and didn't laugh at the mania of our business, that you cannot believe what we go on, how do you survive? And that, more than anything else, is the reason that we're still going at it. Because we can laugh at ourselves. Crowd control. Prior to that, how many years had you been doing it? That part of me was born then. And how did you know how much to charge? Or how did you know how to get an encore out of somebody? How did you know how to tell an act when they asked you what you thought of them? Well, where did that come from? Well, that was an opinion based on what? Did you see that many other acts? No. So what 65 was, it was the beginning across the board. I mean, the only thing that was going on before then, I was alive and I learned how to read and write and had some education, street and academic. But that world, that whole society, I was even more distant from that focus point than Marty Ballin or being born in 65. If in the early days somebody would come up to me and say, I'd like to come into the show, and they show me a card, and I look at the card and it would say, Sam Schwartz, rock critic. And I said, how can you be a rock critic? I mean, the baby's 3 months old or a year old. How can you be a rock sound engineer specialist? How can you be a lighting specialist mainly for rock? We're too young, all of us. And I've always felt that so much of what I do now and so much what I know now started right then, although I applied some experiences that I had in life before that. But if somebody would say, well, Bill, how much experience had you had in 2 or 3? 1, I think that generally speaking, I was the one producer in that early era who was the most realistic about what it might take, that I couldn't leave that much up to the fates, that I couldn't and wouldn't accept a general laissez-faire attitude towards responsibilities, that if it's at 8 o'clock, that's when I open the doors and you should be there, and if it's at 4 o'clock sound check, you should be there, and if I need your picture, Phil Lesh, or the musicians, or the sound people, or
well, how come you were the one to make it happen then? What is it? You say that people have asked you this in the past. You may have thought about yourself in the past, but how come you? Why were you the one that, as you say, picked up the ball and ran with it? What was it that you knew?
I wasn't the only one that tried to run with it.
No, but well, I agree. You're not the only one that tried, but you're the one. You're the major success. How come it worked for you?
I would have to answer you in such a way so as not to put anybody else down, because
right. I'm not trying to put somebody down. I'm asking, what is it about you, Bill Graham, that allowed you to make it work this well?
There were 2 or 3 factors. I'll mention, to get to the paper, if you don't come to me, I'll get to you and get that picture. And some of the other producing factions, even though their philosophy and their outlook was very nice, it was very gentle, it was very non-competitive. Was a nice way to look at business. But the fact that many of these other people did not look at it as a business, and which is a nice way to look at business. I don't want this to be a business. But if you have a candy store here and he's got a candy store there, are you going to tell me you don't care where they go? Then you can't pay your bills. We don't live in utopia. And I think the major problem in the early days was that other people who wanted to put on shows did not face reality. I'm not saying they should or shouldn't. If they didn't care if they'd succeed, that was